There's one question that if your reader isn't desperately asking and you're not constantly answering, your book is going to be dead in the water. The reader is going to close it, put it down, and move on to something else. So this one thing, most writers don't even realize they're getting it wrong. And it doesn't matter how beautiful your prose is. It doesn't matter how much you've built up your world and done all your world building and character development. If your reader isn't dying to turn the page, nothing else matters. Because here's the hard truth. If they stop reading, they're not going to leave a review, they're not going to tell their friends, and they're just going to move on to a better book. So what's the key to keeping the reader engaged? Well, we'll get to that, but first, let's talk about the biggest mistake writers make. Now, my name is Tim Grahl. I'm the CEO of StoryGrid, and we help writers build the stories that keep readers hooked. I've also written 6 books of my own. My most recent is the novel The Shithead, which has been praised by New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling writers. My partner Sean Coyne is the creator and founder of StoryGrid and is a 30-year publishing veteran and an editor of best-selling books. We've cracked the code on what makes a story work, and today we're going to look at that one question your reader is constantly thinking and you should be answering. Now, for most writers, and myself included for a very long time, we tend to get distracted focusing on the wrong things. We're busy crafting complex world building, or we're building intricate backstories, or we're obsessing over story structure. And all of those things are good. I mean, you have to have that in your book, but they're only valuable if they serve the one purpose that actually matters, which is to keep the reader engaged in turning pages late into the night. And the real problem, writers aren't thinking about what's driving their readers forward. If you don't master this one thing, your book is dead on arrival. So what's this secret? What's this question? So let's break it down. Every single scene in your book should have one thing in common. It creates conflict that forces your protagonist to make a choice. This is what makes stories addictive. It's why you stay up late reading even when you know you should be asleep. It all comes down to one simple question. And here it is. Are you ready? I've been teasing it this whole time. What happens next? That's it. If your reader isn't constantly asking that, you've lost them. If you're not constantly answering that, you're definitely going to lose them. The best stories across every genre make sure the reader needs to know what happens next. So the way to do this isn't fancy plot twists or coming up with really intricate secrets and mysteries. The really consistent way to do this is to have the force of antagonism, or the antagonist in your story, want something from the protagonist, want them to do something, want them to give them something, and the protagonist doesn't want to do it. And now we have conflict because both characters deeply care about the outcome. The antagonist wants something that only the protagonist can do for them, and the protagonist does not want to do that thing. And now we have that all-important conflict that builds the tension. And if you do it right, the reader's constantly thinking, well, what's the protagonist going to do next? What is going to happen next? And then the protagonist makes a decision, and the reader is left desperate to see, well, what happens because of the decision? Because every good decision has a win and lose component to it. So we see the protagonist make these really hard decisions. So just think through some different examples from different genres. If we look at a romance story like Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth and Darcy keep making the worst possible choices, but you need to see if they'll end up together. You can look at a more contemporary story like Crazy Rich Asians, and Rachel is constantly put in situations where she's forced to make impossible decisions between, well, do I give myself up to the antagonist force, or do I keep holding on to my ideals? And then, of course, you can see this in action stories where great action movies aren't just about explosions. They work because the protagonist is trapped in increasingly difficult situations where each choice makes things worse and a little bit better in different ways. So no matter the genre, the key is the same. Put your protagonist in a crisis where both choices have real and impactful and irreversible consequences. So there's a really simple way you can start putting this exercise into place with your own writing. So take a scene that you've written recently. Identify what the antagonist wants from the protagonist. If you can't, you already have a problem. And then make sure the protagonist doesn't want to give it to them. And then ensure both characters desperately care about the outcome. This has to matter to both the antagonist and the protagonist. Then rewrite your scene so that the protagonist has to make an extremely hard choice. When you do this, you'll feel the difference, and so will your readers. So that's the question. If your reader, while they're reading, is not constantly wondering what's going to happen next, then you're going to lose them. And if you're not constantly thinking as the writer, I have to make sure my reader is wondering what happens next, then you're going to lose your reader. Now, if you start trying to do this and it feels hard, that's because it is. This is that skill that you've got to grow. And trust me, this is a skill. It's not magic. You can actually learn how to do this. So every writer struggles with this at first, but with practice, you'll start to see how you can keep your readers hooked and wondering what's going to happen next. Now, I've got 2 resources for you that are going to help you do this. The first is our scene writing checklist. This is a free resource. It's a checklist of everything that needs to go into your scene to make sure it works, to make sure it's a page-turning scene that makes people get to the end of the scene and want to turn the page to find out what happens next. Now, we've built this checklist internally. This is what we use, the coaches and mentors in our programs when we're working with writers. This is the exact checklist that we use to make sure the scenes are working. So you'll get that checklist along with a walkthrough of how to use it with your own writing. So you can download that right now by going to storygrid.com/checklist. So that's the first resource. The second resource is when you start trying to do this, you'll start noticing it's hard to actually put this into practice. And the biggest question is, am I doing this right? So when you try to do this on your own by getting peer reviews or getting other writers and writers groups to help you or having beta readers, you don't really get good actionable feedback about what you did right, what you did wrong, and specific things that you can get better at with your next rewrite. And so that's why we run the scene writing workshops here at StoryGrid. These 6-week workshops will help you get better at your writing more in 6 weeks than 6 years of trying to do it on your own, because you're going to get one-on-one feedback from experts on what you did right, what you did wrong, and how to improve in the coming week. Along with that, you get training, there's daily exercises. We have a really great, strong writing community. It's something that has been life-changing now for hundreds and hundreds of writers. So if you're interested in joining us for the next workshop, go to storygrid.com/workshop to find out more. Now, if you want to take this idea of how to write page-turning fiction and keep learning more, I've got the next video you should watch. It's popping up on your screen right now. But either way, thanks so much for being a writer. Thanks for being a part of our community here at StoryGrid, and I'll see you next time.